The Galactic Military Academy on Station Proxima 7 was supposed to be the crown jewel of interstellar education, where the galaxy's brightest minds came to learn the fine art of not getting themselves blown up in space. Unfortunately, nobody told Cadet Jake Crash Murphy this when he somehow managed to pass the entrance exam, probably through a clerical error that 3 different departments were still investigating. Jake had earned his nickname the old-fashioned way, by crashing into, through, or occasionally under every piece of equipment the Academy owned. His instructors had developed a betting pool on how many things he'd break each week. The current record was 17, set during what the Academy now referred to as the Great Holodeck Incident of last Tuesday. But Jake wasn't the Academy's biggest mystery. That honor belonged to a crystalline artifact sitting in the museum's central display case, looking about as interesting as a really expensive paperweight. The relic stood 3 feet tall, shaped like a twisted spire of midnight black crystal that occasionally caught the light in ways that made your eyes water. It had been sitting there for 200 years, ever since the archaeological team from the Meridian expedition found it floating in deep space, doing absolutely nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. The thing was deader than last semester's cafeteria meatloaf. Every professor, admiral, and self-proclaimed genius in the galaxy had taken a crack at it. They'd tried everything from ancient incantations to quantum resonance scanners to one memorable incident involving a Rigelian pop singer and 17,000 watts of amplified sound. The relic's response to all of this attention? Complete and utter silence. The Academy had eventually given up and stuck it in the museum as a conversation piece, right between the display of antique plasma rifles and a hologram of Admiral Stekvar's famous last stand at the Battle of Nowhere Important. Most cadets walked past it without a second glance, which was fine by the relic, since it apparently had nothing to say to anyone anyway. Jake, however, had developed a weird relationship with the thing. Not intentionally, mind you. It was just that he spent a lot of time in the museum, usually because he was in trouble for something. Again. The detention duties rotated between scrubbing plasma conduits and cleaning the museum exhibits, and Jake had drawn museum duty so often that he'd started to feel like the relic's unpaid janitor. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the Academy's most prestigious artifact was being maintained by their least prestigious cadet. But hey, at least Jake was consistent in his mediocrity, which was more than could be said for half the honor students who panicked the moment anything didn't go, according to their perfectly memorized protocols. Over the years, the relic had been subjected to more poke and prod sessions than a hypochondriac at a medical convention. The Academy kept detailed records of every attempt, mostly so they could avoid repeating the same failures twice, though some of the more stubborn professors insisted on trying anyway. Commander Vex Thul, a 4-armed Zentarian with an ego bigger than his homeworld's 3 moons, represented the proper military protocol school of thought. He approached the relic like he was conducting a formal inspection, complete with white gloves and a checklist longer than Jake's disciplinary record. Professor Quindar, an ethereal Etherian who claimed to be older than some star systems, tried the mystical approach. She would float around the relic in increasingly complex patterns, chanting in 17 different dead languages while waving crystals that probably cost more than Jake's tuition. Her theory was that the artifact responded to ancient harmonics and spiritual resonance, which sounded impressive until you realized she'd been saying the same thing for 30 years with 0 results. The relic remained as responsive as a tax auditor at a charity dinner. Then there was Captain Blaze, a Pyronian whose solution to every problem involved more energy. His species naturally ran about 300 degrees hotter than most life forms, and he had the personality to match. "Stand back, everyone," he'd announce, charging up enough energy to power a small moon. "I'm going to wake this thing up the hard way." He'd unleash enough concentrated heat to turn sand into glass, filling the museum with the smell of ozone and singed pride. The relic would sit there afterward, not even warm to the touch, as if it had just been gently misted by a particularly ineffective sprinkler system. The pattern repeated with depressing regularity. Telepathic Mindari would attempt psychic contact and come away with nothing but headaches. Techno-savvy Siberians would hook up devices that beeped and hummed impressively while accomplishing absolutely nothing. Even the Philosophical Council of Thinky Thoughts had sent a delegation to ponder at it meaningfully for 3 days straight, which was apparently their version of aggressive action. Jake watched most of these attempts from his cleaning duties, providing unhelpful commentary that earned him extra detention. Maybe try asking it nicely, he'd suggested during one particularly dramatic failure. Have you considered that it might just not like you? These observations were not appreciated by the scientific community, who preferred their failures to come with more dignity and fewer smart-ass remarks from the human cleanup crew. The truth was, Jake found the whole thing kind of sad. Here was this artifact that had traveled who knows how far across the galaxy, survived whatever had happened to its creators, and ended up as the universe's most expensive conversation starter, and everyone just kept shouting at it in different languages, expecting it to jump up and dance on command like some kind of cosmic trained seal. It was during his 47th detention of the semester, a new personal record that Jake wore like a badge of dishonor, that everything changed. The museum was empty except for the usual displays and the soft hum of environmental systems. Jake had been assigned to clean the floors, which in academy terms meant push a mop around while contemplating your life choices. He found himself standing in front of the Relic again, mop in hand, looking at the thing that had stumped some of the galaxy's greatest minds. The crystalline surface caught the overhead lights, creating patterns that seemed almost like they were trying to form shapes before dissolving back into random reflections. "You know what your problem is?" Jake said to the crystal, wringing out his mop with more force than strictly necessary. "Everyone treats you like you're some kind of mystical puzzle box instead of, I don't know, maybe something that used to belong to actual people." The Relic, predictably, didn't respond, but Jake was just getting started. "I mean, seriously, look at this place," he continued, gesturing around the sterile museum with its perfect lighting and climate control. "It's like a mausoleum in here. No wonder you don't want to talk to anyone. They've got you sitting in this glass case like you're already dead, and then they wonder why you won't wake up and say hello." Jake started mopping again, working his way around the display case in slow circles. "And the way they talk to you, man. It's all ancient artifact designation this and respond to lawful commands that. When's the last time anyone just had a conversation with you? When's the last time someone told you about their day, or complained about the weather, or asked how you're doing?" The irony of talking to an inanimate object about conversation wasn't lost on Jake, but he'd long since given up on his dignity anyway. "I bet whoever made you wasn't all formal and stuffy. I bet they were just regular people trying to get by, same as everyone else. Probably had jobs they hated, relationships that were complicated, maybe some hobbies that their friends thought were weird." As Jake talked, something strange started happening. At first he thought it was just his imagination, or maybe the museum's lighting was acting up again, but the patterns in the crystal seemed to be getting brighter, more defined, like someone was slowly turning up the contrast on a holographic display. "You want to know what my day was like?" Jake asked, not noticing the subtle changes in the artifact. "Well, first I managed to short-circuit 3 different training simulators during combat practice. Apparently there's a right way and a wrong way to handle plasma rifles, and I've discovered at least 6 wrong ways that weren't even in the manual." The crystal pulsed, just once so faintly that Jake missed it completely. "Then during astrogation class, I somehow calculated a hyperspace jump that would have taken us directly through the core of a star. Professor Clickster said it was mathematically impossible to be that wrong by accident, which I'm choosing to take as a compliment." Another pulse, slightly stronger this time. Jake kept talking, venting about professors who treated him like a walking disaster, classmates who either ignored him or used him as a cautionary tale, and an academy that seemed designed to remind him daily that he didn't belong there. With each honest, unfiltered word, the crystal grew a little brighter, the patterns a little clearer, but Jake was too caught up in his therapeutic rant to notice that he was no longer talking to an inanimate object. The moment Jake said, "Honestly, sometimes I think this whole place would run smoother if people just talked to each other like normal human beings instead of reading everything off a script," the Relic exploded into light. Not literally exploded, which was good news for Jake's continued existence, but it went from expensive paperweight to miniature sun in about half a second. the entire museum filled with brilliant blue-white radiance that had Jake stumbling backward, dropping his mop with a clatter that echoed through the suddenly very much not quiet space. "Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap," Jake muttered, shielding his eyes with his hand. What did I do? What did I break this time? Because of course his first assumption was that he'd somehow managed to break a priceless archaeological artifact through the power of conversation. It would be just his luck. The alarm started about 3 seconds later, blaring through the station with the kind of urgency usually reserved for hull breaches or surprise inspections. Emergency lights began flashing, and Jake could hear the thunder of boots as half the academy came running to see what catastrophe the human cadet had caused now. Commander Vexthal was the first through the museum doors, all forearms reaching for different weapons, until he saw Jake standing there like a deer caught in headlights, surrounded by enough illumination to guide ships home from 3 star systems away. "Murphy, what have you done?" "I didn't do anything," Jake protested, which was technically true if you did not count the part where he'd been having a heart-to-heart with ancient alien technology. "I was just cleaning and it just started glowing." Professor Quindar materialized next to the commander in that unsettling way Etherians had of moving. Her normally serene expression was about as far from calm as Jake had ever seen it. "The artifact is fully active," she whispered, her voice filled with the kind of awe usually reserved for religious experiences or really good pizza. "After 2 centuries of dormancy, it's completely online." More officers poured into the museum. Captain Blaze radiating enough heat to make the air shimmer, a cluster of Siberian technicians with scanning equipment, and Admiral Korthak herself, the station commander, who Jake had only seen from a distance during formal ceremonies. The fact that she was here, in person, looking at the mess he'd apparently made, was probably not good news for his continued enrollment. The Relic, meanwhile, seemed to be trying to communicate. Holographic displays were forming in the air around it, showing symbols and patterns that shifted and flowed like living text. The problem was, nobody could understand what it was trying to say. "Run a linguistic analysis," Admiral Korthak commanded. "Cross-reference with all known ancient languages." The Siberian technicians went to work, their mechanical fingers flying over holographic interfaces. After several minutes of impressive beeping and humming, their leader reported, "No matches in any database, Admiral. The symbolic structure doesn't correspond to any known communication system." That's when the Relic did something unexpected. The holographic display shifted, and suddenly Jake could hear something that sounded almost like a voice, though it seemed to come from inside his head rather than through his ears. "Finally," the voice said with a tone that Jake immediately recognized as exasperated relief. "Someone who talks like a normal person instead of reciting a technical manual." Jake looked around at all the officers staring at him expectantly. He said. "I think it's trying to talk to me." "What is it saying?" Admiral Korthak demanded. Jake listened for a moment to the voice that apparently only he could hear. It says thank you for finally treating it like a person instead of a piece of equipment. And it wants to know if all military organizations are as obsessed with formal protocols as this one." The assembled officers looked at each other with expressions ranging from confusion to outright disbelief. Captain Blaze was the first to speak. "You're telling us that a priceless ancient artifact is making small talk?" "Pretty much, yeah," Jake confirmed. "Oh, and it also says that your approach to first contact could use some work." What followed was possibly the most surreal briefing session in military history. Admiral Korthak had cleared the museum of everyone except essential personnel, which apparently now included Jake despite his complete lack of qualifications for dealing with ancient alien technology. The Relic continued to project holographic displays while Jake served as the galaxy's most unlikely translator. "Okay," Jake said, listening to the voice that seemed to find the whole situation as absurd as he did. "It says its name is something like Keeper, Guardian, close enough. It's part of a network of defensive systems built by a civilization that called themselves the Builders." Admiral Korthak leaned forward. "Ask it about their technology level, their capabilities." Jake relayed the question and listened to the response. "It says the Builders were pretty advanced, but not in the way you'd expect. They were more like Engineers who happen to stumble onto some really powerful stuff rather than mystical space wizards. Think of them as the galaxy's first really successful tech startup. Professor Quindar looked slightly offended. That seems somewhat mundane for a civilization capable of creating technology this sophisticated. That's exactly what the Guardian says you'd say, Jake replied. Apparently everyone always expects ancient civilizations to be all mysterious and profound, but the builders were just people trying to solve practical problems, like how to keep hostile aliens from wiping them out. The holographic displays shifted, showing what looked like a tactical overview of local space. Red markers appeared at various points, and Jake felt a chill as the Guardian's voice took on a more urgent tone. "Oh," Jake said, his casual demeanor slipping for the first time. "Oh, that's not good. Guardian says there's a hostile force approaching this sector. Something called the Devourers, and they're about 3 days out from Proxima 7. Captain Blaze's temperature spiked, filling the air with heat shimmer. What kind of hostile force? How many ships? Jake listened, then paled. It's not ships. It's more like a swarm. Think locusts, but the size of battlecruisers and with a really bad attitude. They strip mine entire solar systems and move on. The Guardian says its network was built specifically to stop them. Admiral Korthak's expression had shifted from skeptical to deadly serious. Can the defensive network still function after all this time? That's the thing, Jake said, his voice getting smaller as the implications hit him. The network's been dormant for so long because nobody could interface with it properly. All the formal protocols and ancient language attempts just confused it. The builders designed their systems to respond to natural, conversational interaction, because that's how they communicated with each other. Professor Quindar was frantically taking notes on a holographic display. So our formal approach was actually counterproductive? According to Guardian, yeah. The builders were apparently a pretty casual bunch. Their entire technological philosophy was based on making things that regular people could use without having to memorize instruction manuals the size of small planets. The weight of the situation was starting to sink in. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had spent centuries trying to unlock ancient technology by treating it like a puzzle to be solved, when all it really wanted was someone to talk to it like a friend. "Can you activate the network?" Admiral Korthak asked. Jake posed the question and listened to the response. Guardian says yes, but it needs me to maintain the communication link. Apparently, I'm the first person it's encountered who speaks naturally enough to interface properly with the builder systems. What does that mean exactly? Commander Vexthol asked, all forearms crossed skeptically. Jake grinned, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, he felt like he might actually be good at something. It means the galaxy's most sophisticated defense system needs a translator, and lucky for all of us, I happen to speak fluent smartass. 3 days later, Jake found himself in the academy's main command center, sitting in what had previously been a storage closet but was now officially designated as the Human Builder Interface Station. It wasn't exactly the promotion he'd dreamed of, but it beat detention duty by a considerable margin. The Devourer swarm had arrived right on schedule, which would have been terrifying if not for the fact that the Builder defensive network had also come online right on schedule. Jake maintained a running conversation with Guardian and 17 other artificial intelligences scattered across the sector, coordinating a defense grid that had been waiting 2,000 years for someone to ask it nicely to work. Guardian wants to know if you can see the fireworks from there, Jake reported to Admiral Korthak as the ancient weapon system systematically dismantled the Devourer swarm with efficiency that bordered on the artistic. It says this is the most fun it's had since the last time someone tried to invade builder space. Through the command center's main viewport, they could see flashes of light as the defensive grid did its work. It wasn't the massive explosions of conventional warfare, but rather precise surgical strikes that left the Devourers looking confused before they simply stopped existing. Tell Guardian we are grateful for its assistance, Admiral Korthak said formally. Jake relayed the message and listened to the response. It says you're welcome, but you really need to work on your small talk. Also, it wants to know if the cafeteria food here is as bad as it suspects. Captain Blaze, who had been monitoring the tactical displays, looked up with something approaching respect. How did you know to just, talk to it normally? Jake shrugged. I guess I figured if I was stuck somewhere for 200 years with nobody to talk to, I'd probably want someone to treat me like a person instead of a machine. Plus, honestly, I talk to everything. Computers, training simulators, my lunch when it looks particularly questionable. It was bound to work eventually. The battle, if you could call it that, was over within an hour. The Devourer swarm had been neutralized with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested the Builder defensive network could have handled 10 times as many invaders without breaking a sweat. In the aftermath, Jake found himself with a new official position as liaison to Builder technology systems, which came with a modest pay raise and a significantly reduced chance of accidental equipment destruction. The Academy had also installed a comfortable chair next to Guardian's display case in the museum, where Jake spent most of his free time chatting with an artificial intelligence that had waited centuries for someone to ask it how its day was going. You know what the funny thing is? Jake said to Guardian during one of their regular conversations. Everyone here is still trying to figure out the deep philosophical implications of why I can communicate with you when nobody else could. And what do you think? Guardian asked, its holographic displays shifting to show what Jake had learned to recognize as amusement. Jake leaned back in his chair, looking around at the museum that had gone from his place of punishment to his unofficial office. I think maybe the secret to understanding advanced alien technology isn't being smarter or more educated or more formally trained. Maybe it's just remembering that somebody built it, and that somebody was probably just as confused and frustrated and hopeful as the rest of us. Guardian's displays pulsed with what Jake had come to recognize as approval. The Builders would have liked you, Jake Murphy. They always said the best technology was technology that felt like talking to a friend. And if that wasn't the most human thing an ancient alien AI had ever said, Jake thought, he didn't know what was. Outside the museum windows, the stars continued their ancient dance. A little bit safer now thanks to a defensive network that just needed someone to ask it politely to do its job. And in the museum, a failed cadet and an ancient guardian continued their conversation, proving that sometimes the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy could learn a thing or two from humanity's complete inability to take anything too seriously.